Hey, greetings, class. My name is Chris Warsitz, and I'm a guest instructor here at AFIT. I help out with several different courses for your counterparts and some of your other civil engineer comrades. And I've been teaching at the AFIT facility since 2011, since I was active duty. Just a little bit of a background for me before we get started. I am a retired civil engineer, senior master sergeant, AFSC 3E6. So I was one of the folks that wrote the original AFIs and Air Force pamphlets that detail facility management. So I've been asked on several occasions to come over to AFIT and to talk about facility management, and I still help with the facility management portion of AFI 32-1001. So with that being said, I am currently on Air Force Materiel Command, Air Force Civil Engineer staff, and I detail facility management and work with facility management on a daily basis. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of walk you through a facility management lesson to help you get started in your role and become a better airman dormitory leader. So here's an overview on what we'll be discussing. I just wanted to kind of take a few minutes to just say, okay, welcome to the career field. This is how you get started. This is what you can do to make your job much easier and much better moving forward. I will detail the civil engineering organization and show you where you fit now into the organization and how the flow of communication happens throughout civil engineering, on what you will be now as a member of civil engineering and how you fit into the chain of command and how everything works behind the scenes, so you understand how information is submitted, how work tasks are submitted, and how everything flows through the organization. Then I want to talk to you about work classification and how work gets prioritized within CE, and then talk to you a little bit about some of the higher end spectrum of the things you can expect, such as project planning, execution, dorm master planning, dorm of the future, that kind of stuff. And then I will break down the last portion of the lesson into specific facility management, talk to you about some of your roles and responsibilities as an airman dormitory leader, working the facility management role and how it fits into the dormitory structure. And those are some of the sub categories we'll be talking about under facility management as well. So getting started, the very first thing I wanted to point out to you is, what is facility management? What does facility management do? Where did it come from, and how does it fit into the Air Force and the purpose that it serves? So facility management, defined by International Facility Management Association, essentially is a profession that encompasses multiple disciplines to ensure functionality of the built environment by integrating all of your resources such as people, place, process, and technology. And where did the Air Force adopt it from, and how does it fit? It fits into Air Force Policy Directive 32-10, installations and facilities, and you will see the Air Force Civil Engineer AFIs all derive under the 32 series that are some sort of tenet from AFPD 32-10. And the purpose, essentially, that it serves, the base civil engineer is charged under AFPD 32-10 with supplying installation or supplying facilities to the installation and making sure that folks have the necessity or necessities for the facilities to perform their function. So in a sense, the purpose it serves is to maintain an adequate number of facilities to accomplish the mission, period, dot, end of sentence. So who maintains Air Force facilities? So as I said a second ago, in AFPD 32-10, installations and facilities, it falls under the wing commander, and the wing commander further directs this to the base civil engineer, and the base civil engineer's main objective is to effectively operate and maintain that real property installed equipment, or RIPE as we like to call it. So as part of getting started, the first thing you should do, and your first responsibility as a facility manager, is become familiar with the facilities under your purview. I know some folks have already been out in performing the duties and may have already done some of this, but for those of you that are just new to the course and need to break into your role, the first thing you should do is you should walk all of your facilities. Become intimately known with those facilities, because you, whether you like it or not, are now going to be that go-to person for the facility, or in this case, the dormitories under your purview. So if you're at a large base, and let's say right pat where we're stationed here, then you probably have anywhere from 10 to 15 different dormitories on your installation. So it's going to take you a little while, but get with some of the other folks that have been on the job for a little while, if there's multiple folks in your office, and do a walkthrough. Try to talk to your residents. Go out there and find out any key recurring issues that they may have. Start to review some of the records that are already on hand. Hopefully you had somebody that sat in your position before and you're not walking in totally blind. But either way, you should have some sort of records. Try to ask your civil engineer customer service folks, and we'll get to that section in a second. But ask them for maybe a breakdown of historical records that talk about, what open action items, maintenance anomalies, typical recurring issues, and all that kind of stuff. So what that will do is that will help you become as familiar as possible, so that way you can keep up with the maintenance, the upkeep, and the overall, workability of the facility. So you'll know the age, the size, the type, facility work, what's historical, and what you might have to forecast. Once you get in and do all that, it will make your job much, much easier. And then obtain some facility manager training ASAP. I know that you're getting this lesson from me, somebody that's been around for a long time, that's going to help you break into your role, but I teach this at the Air Force level. So every base has certain isms, as we like to call that, for what happens at their installation and what they want people to know. So the best thing to do is get with your folks locally and try to get some facility manager training, so that way you understand these are some of the specifics for whatever base you're going to be assigned to. And then familiarize yourself with different classifications of work priorities, and funding categories. I'm going to do a quick overview of all that, so you have a general understanding of each one of those. But what you want to do is you want to, again, really familiarize yourself with it. Get to know, what shops do what work. We'll get into that a little bit further, but that will help you, because depending on what base you go to and what civil engineer maintenance database you use, you will be responsible for entering that information into the system for initial review. So the more that you know about different classifications, work priorities, and methods of accomplishment, the better off you will be as you move forward. The next is a suggestion, not mandatory, but definitely a suggestion, is to meet with your base contracting folks and ask them about some of the different contract entities that you have available at your fingertips, or you might deal with throughout your duties assigned at your installation. And I say that specifically because depending on what command you go to and what base, you very well might fall under what we call a civil engineer base operations contract, or BOC, or a base maintenance contract, BMC. So with that said, you'll deal with contractors all day long, and meeting with base contracting will help you understand better what the requirements are. And at the end of the day, you might even be assigned as what we call a contract officer representative, or a COR. And really all that is that's you basically looking at how the contractor is performing, and just giving some detailed notes to the contract officer in the contracting squadron, so that way they can keep detailed tabs on the contractor and make sure that they're living up to their end of the contract and how the contract is laid out. So also, as an FM, you're going to deal with a lot of different CE functions. You should take the time to familiarize yourself with CE. I know from my experience in teaching this course with Mr. Callis over the course of the last probably 2-3 years now, we see that there's typically a 30% or maybe more population in the courses of folks that are prior CE, if you will. But for you folks that are not CE and have never been CE, this is a way for you to get familiarized with CE and the way that it's laid out and how the squadron or group functions. So here's a typical look of what your CE squadron or group will look like. So if you can see here, it says civil engineering organization typical. Now, if it's a contract organization or something that's completely out the window, you'll need to go and talk to your local folks when you get there, and they'll give you a different map or a layout here. But typically, this is exactly where you'll end up working. And my apologies again, if you look at the bubble on the left should be circling the box above, which is dormitory management. That is where you're assigned. So when you look at this, you look at civil engineering organization and you look at it says where you will work, dormitory management. The thing I need to foot stomp and what I need everybody to understand, which is usually typically better in person, is you are now all civil engineers. When you accepted this duty and became an airman dormitory leader, you are now a civil engineer. So next to your name on your email box and organizational structure, it's going to say whatever the numerical value is and then civil engineering squadron or civil engineering group. You are all civil engineers. So you will work internally with other civil engineer organizations. So if you've had any experience in the past about being a facility manager or working in a facility and you've had issues with your lights, your plumbing, your heating, anything along those lines, you placed a call to civil engineer customer service. Well, now those civil engineer customer service folks, you will deal with them more than you will deal with any other entity on the entire base other than the airmen that live in your dormitories. And you need to develop that close working relationship with them. And remember that at the end of the day, you're both civil engineers and you both have the same boss, aka the base civil engineer. So if you look at the bubble on the right, you're going to see it circling something called requirements and optimization. That's who you will work with. Under requirements optimization in the operations flight and CE, that's where the civil engineer customer service function resides. Now, like I said before, depending on the base that you go to, that will determine exactly what civil engineer maintenance database that you will use. So mostly folks are using a new program called Tririga, or it's also called Next Generation IT or Next Gen IT. You may hear me use those terms. Those terms essentially mean the same thing. It's a new database. It's called Next Gen IT, and Tririga was the initial contractor. When all that was set forth and initialized throughout the CE community, they made facility managers as what we call power users. Those power users now will receive in-depth training and also receive an account for Next Gen IT. And your duty will be anytime you have an issue with your airmen's lights or their heating, ventilation, air conditioning, or anything along those lines, you will be the one that will enter all that into the computer system. And we'll get more in depth on how that works. But that's immediately transferred and transmitted to these folks in requirements and optimization for our customer service individuals, and they will review and assign that to the appropriate shop for execution. So maintaining that good relationship with these folks is key, and I just wanted you to see how everything flowed. And just so you have background information, you can take the time later to look at the rest of the CE organization so you understand how things flow. And we'll talk about where things reside and how things work as we go through the presentation. So under requirements and optimization in the operations flight, you have something called operations engineering. Operations engineering, you can see, is the actual element underneath the operations flight. And within those, you can see how the requirements and optimization folks or your CE customer service folks fall into that realm. And the reason why the Air Force switched over for CE, for any of those folks that have been CE for a while or have dealt with CE, is we used to measure the way that we did everything based on how quickly we responded or whether we responded in a certain time frame. And it was very manipulative and it was subjective, to say the least. So operations engineering basically was born out of something called Program Action Directive PAD 12-03 that revitalized the way that civil engineer squadrons do business. And it was housed in asset management principles that basically helped us work on the best assets at the right time and right resources towards those assets. So, a sense, asset management. Just basically, if you think about it in the realm of, your personal automobile, it's, I have to keep my automobile running and I only have so much money. I don't have enough to make it brand new every day. So, what's the best use of my resources to keep my vehicle running, for the long term? Where do I put that money towards that certain part to make it utilizable and give me the most bang for the buck? So that's how it was born. It changed, and that's how we changed the way that we look at classifying and prioritize work. So the purpose that it serves is it helps the folks in CE be more purposeful on how they perform maintenance and what they do, but at the same time, we still have to react to customers. So whatever we're not finding on our own from our own inspections, we rely on the customer to give us, that feedback to let us know what's broken and what's going on. So in a sense, that's where you come into play and why you'll deal with these folks the most. So with that said, we have work classification. So it says right in here, work must be classified in one of four categories. And you see AFI 32-1032, Chapter 6. Just wanted to give you an update. Within the last couple months, AFI 32-1032 was rescinded and absorbed. And there were a couple of other AFIs that were coupled in under the new Chief of Staff directive to cut down on the number of AFIs. A lot of AFIs are being combined. So a few AFIs were combined into a new AFI called AFI 32-1020, 1020. So everything that I'm going to relay here as far as for classification, instead of being 32-1032, it's 32-1020. So just so you have that reference if you want to go back and look this up. So what we talk about is we talk about the different means to accomplish work. So we start out with construction. Construction means basically just that. It's a means to build, develop, convert, or extend real property and systems or components. Basically, if you look at it like this, if it wasn't there before and I want it there now, it's construction. There are certain caveats to that, but realistically, we don't need to get into that in this forum. But if you think about that in the realm of it's not there now, I want it, it's a new addition that's always going to be termed as construction. So think about that as you go through some of your dormitories and walk around and look at some of your airmen's inquiries or the requests and think if it's deemed construction under the priority scheme, which we'll get to in a minute, the priority scheme, most civil engineer units are no longer doing construction. It's all something that would require the end user to fund that in one manner or another and basically hire their own contractor with CE's approval. And again, we'll get to that later. But I just want you to understand construction, not there now, I want it or I need it. That's how it will be classified. And then we come down to repair. So repair, there's actually a couple different types of repair. But repair is basically going to consist of anything you can think of now. Like I like to call this my honey-do list. Like, if anybody in the class is married or has a significant other or has that list of tasks when they get home, like, okay, I know I need to tighten the hinges on my door. I know I need to fix that dripping faucet. I know I need to adjust my thermostat or, any one of those things. Think about it in the realm of, it's a relatively small thing. It doesn't require a lot of detailed planning or a lot of time to complete. So at the end of the day, I like to think about that as the honey-do list. You're just knocking off items that are quick fixes, quick hits with very, very little material and manpower and planning associated. So this is what you'll deal with probably, I'd say, 95% of your tasks. And this is where you'll have airmen in the dormitories who will come up and say, hey, my toilet doesn't flush, or I have no heat in my room, I have no air conditioning in my room, or I can't lock my door. When I go to lock my door, I have to slam it because it sticks. Several different things of that nature, just a quick fix, quick hitting type items. That's what we call sustainment repair. Those are emergency responses and service calls for minor repair, and it just maintains the inventory of our real property, as I talked about earlier. So it can include major repairs or replacement of facility components. So let's say, for instance, you have an airman that says, I have no air conditioning in my dorm room. CE service call folks from the shops respond. They attempt to fix it. They get it going. 2 days later, they get another call that it's out again. They come back, they get it going. They have to replace, a certain component, like let's say a compressor of an air conditioner. That lasts for a month, and then all of a sudden it goes out again. This craftsman determined, we can't fix this any longer. We can't limp it along. We have to do a replacement of the entire component for that room if it's controlled individually for the room. So those are things that are also part of sustainment repair. Then if you move on to where we call restoration and modernization repair, this includes repair replacement work to restore facilities damaged due to something that was inadequately sustained. So let's say, for instance, you have a dormitory. The dormitory has been mothballed for years because, you just haven't had a need. All of a sudden, you stand up a new mission at your installation, or due to these, COVID-19 type things that are going on right now, they want to know, hey, if we have somebody that's, got the corona zombie virus, you want to isolate them, you're going to throw them into this dorm. Say that loosely. I don't want to joke around about it, but for isolation factors, they want to have some place to isolate. So now all of a sudden they're going to take this mothballed and closed down facility. It has rooms, it has everything they need, and they're going to open this for either incoming airmen or, a simple use facility. Let's say that facility has been closed down and mothballed with the bare minimum maintenance for the last 3 years. Guess what? They're going to have to go through there and they're going to have to restore that facility to the original working condition by doing whatever they need. So that could come down to replacing a bunch of toilets because those toilets are now, dry. The seals are dry rotted and no longer will hold water. Could be, upgrading the HVAC system. It could be anything. And then you also have, one part of restoration is, let's say you have a storm, an AC unit is hit by lightning, then they'll go through there and they'll replace that and restore it because it was hit by lightning. So also can be used for modernization for stuff that alters facilities. Let's say, for instance, you have, a dormitory and none of your rooms in your dormitory are handicap accessible, but you have an airman that is still active duty, but yet meets the definition of, being handicapped and having to have something, to meet their needs. Could be a wounded warrior. It could be any one of those things. So what modernization repair would do is it would actually bring that facility up to the new standard to meet new code and regulatory compliance. So probably something very minimal for something, but anything could happen. They could come out with a new, electrical component that says it meets national fire protection, so NFPA standards, or NEC, National Electric Code, and they have to go and update electrical panels or whatever. That's considered modernization repair. And the last classification is what we call maintenance. Maintenance, you probably won't see a lot of folks out there. Those are going to be for the things that they're out there looking at, like your mechanical rooms and all that. If the mechanical room's on the outside of the building, you're probably not going to see a civil engineer craftsman come out or even know they're going to be there. The only time they'll have to get in touch with you and let you know that they're coming is if it requires a shutdown or anything like that to do that kind of maintenance. And that's where they're just checking on like belt tension, different bearing settings, the whole 9 yards, and looking at everything just to make sure that the facility, and the systems keep running according to design and plan. So where it says dorm room has sink leaking, please ignore that. That should be under your sustainment repair. And then demolition, although it's not a work classification, it's still work that CE does. So let's say, for instance, we go back to that example where I said about the mothballed facility. That mothballed facility could be mothballed because you no longer have a need for it, and now it's on what we call the demolition list or the demo list. So basically, you're not doing anything with the facility. You have nobody in there, but you still have to do minimal maintenance for that facility until that facility is actually demolished and removed from records. So moving along, now that you know the classification, and like I said, I'm going to break this down with you and show you how everything flows behind the scenes for CE. And the reason why I want you to understand that is I want you to understand sometimes how long it takes and why it takes so long for your craftsmen to respond to things. So this stuff is all happening behind the scenes. So the work priorities updated and activated as of July of 2013. Remember that resource I gave you earlier, that Program Action Directive, or PAD 12-03. This was born from PAD 1203 and basically redefined the way that CE does work, as I said earlier. We wanted to work smarter, better, and applying asset management principles to how we do our business. So if folks have been around for a little while, you may have heard the terminology of emergency, urgent, and routine work for what we call direct scheduled work tasks, or now just work tasks in the system, or service calls. That all went away, and basically we replaced that with a simple priority 1 through 4A scheme, which I'll show you here in a minute on the next slide. And then it also replaced priorities for what we called planned work orders, because remember earlier I said that most of the time CE will respond to stuff that we classify as like a honey-do list kind of thing, a quick fix. Well, we still used to do planned work orders that used to be submitted by an Air Force Form 332. Well, that all went away, and now we're coupling even planned work in with our normal priorities. So you can see larger scale projects actually getting done on base, but I just want to let you know there's going to be few and far in between. So the new priorities apply to all work tasks and planned facility projects, and the philosophy is, like I said, we used to measure success on how fast we responded, but it wasn't necessarily doing what was important or the right thing to do at the right time. So the philosophy's changed. Now we're doing the right things, and we're giving preventive maintenance a top priority. And by doing preventive maintenance, that goes back to the analogy that I gave you earlier about your automobiles, your cars. If you have a brake system on your car and you step on the brake and all of a sudden your foot and the whole car starts vibrating, that tells you that you have a problem. If you ignore that problem and keep driving your vehicle, eventually when you step on your vehicle, you're going to hear a really bad metal grinding noise or some high-pitched squealing. You may ignore that and continue to drive. Eventually, as you drive, you're going to go to step on the brakes and it's just not going to work anymore. And if you had taken the time to look at your vehicle when you first stepped on it and heard a squeak, you change your brake pads, you're good. If not, then all of a sudden you step on your brakes and it vibrates. Now you have to replace your rotors, and then so on and so on and so forth. The same concept with our facility component systems. If we ignore all the problems and we don't adequately do preventive maintenance on those, everything's going to break down much faster and cost the Air Force much more money. So we found that following industry best practice standards and looking at everything through a holistic approach, by doing preventive maintenance and making that a top priority, our assets last a lot longer, and we have a lot less emergency breakdown or corrective maintenance. So we made preventive maintenance our second priority over emergency response. And that gives our engineers the ability to optimize what limited resources we have. And as you all know from your career fields, you have limited resources in your career field as well. So, but at the end of the day, we're still customer oriented, and we still have, uh, principles. We still have completion time frames, but our completion time frames are no longer just arbitrary like they used to be. They're more focused and better and purposeful. So here are our work priorities and how they break down. The work priorities break down into priority one. That's our emergencies. That's where you're driving on base and you're seeing CE work crews working all hours of the night, 24/7 until they get it done. That's an emergency. That's a no BS. Our folks aren't going home until this is fixed. So what happened is we used to be able to just say, okay, we're done with the emergency. We're going to downgrade this task, and we're going to just basically press on. What we have to do now is we have to determine how is this emergency mitigated, and oh, by the way, if we do create a follow-on task for this, does the follow-on task still leave an emergency situation, or does it make it so the facility and the rest of the mission can continue and be prioritized with everything else? So essentially, from what you see, if it's an emergency, it's going to remain an emergency until that emergency is mitigated. Then we drop down into priority 2A. Priority 2A is exactly what I talked about before, and that's preventive maintenance. That is our folks going out there and working in the mechanical rooms and extending the life cycle of that asset, looking at belt tightness, replacing bearings, doing that little bit of stuff that they know they have to do from a preventive maintenance aspect. And then priority 2B, not really necessarily something you need to know. I just wanted you to see this on here. But priority 2B is the ability for us to get some of our bigger projects done while maintaining readiness standards for our civil engineer, craftsmen, and airmen. So it goes down into what they call sorts reportable, and basically keeping our airmen ready to go for deployment and worldwide status. So that's typically a multi-craft job. So let's say, for instance, you have a major issue with your dormitory, and your dormitory has low water flow, and they determine that they need to replace the lateral water line going into your facility. But the lateral water line runs underneath a parking lot and can be close to the road, so it has to be sited by our engineers, and then it enters into the facility, but the new one has to be cut into the side of the facility, and some electrical and HVAC stuff has to be moved. I think everyone would agree that that's a multi-craft work task, and that multi-craft work task allows those folks to work on that high-level project to maintain their readiness requirements and still satisfy, that job. So we created priority 2B to still allow for that and not kill the rest of our priorities, so to say. These are going to be probably very few and far in between, and you won't see this very often. But like I said, I just wanted you to see that so you understand how the priorities work. And then we move down into priority 3s. So 3A through 3C is where you will spend most of your time. Hopefully you don't have a whole lot of emergencies that arise, but stuff happens. I mean, you're stationed in Florida and it's August and someone has no air conditioning in their room and you have nowhere to move them. We'll all agree that that's going to be an emergency because it impacts life, safety, health. For the rest of everything else, if it doesn't fall under an emergency and it has something to do with what you'll do every day, this is where, hey, my toilet's leaking. It's not a major leak. It's not a huge issue, but it's a leak, and the resident has to mop the floor every other day. Or, hey, I can secure my door, but it's a major pain because the hinges are misaligned or whatever. Or, yeah, I have air conditioning, but the coolest I can get it in my room is 70. It's comfortable, but yet uncomfortable. There's a lot of things that fall under that, and that'll come into your priority 3s. So those are really your routine follow-on tasks. So remember I said earlier, there's no longer anything called emergency urgent routine. It goes right into priority one, which still falls under the same definition of emergency, and then rolls down through two and down into the threes. Priority 3A, 3B, and 3C are all interdependently prioritized based on the use of the facility, any associated other risks or fire deficiencies or anything along those lines. So, a tip for you when you get to your base, what you should do is you should ask for a list of the mission dependency indexes, or MDI, for your dormitory facilities. The Air Force Civil Engineer Center, or AFCEC, sat down with your wing leadership over the course of the last 2 years, and they reprioritized and redid everything with MDIs, or Mission Dependency Index, and basically created what they call tactical MDIs. And every facility on the entire installation was reprioritized and given a new MDI. So this is how it all breaks down. So let's say, for instance, you are the air traffic control tower. I know you're probably thinking right now, okay, yeah, it's probably one of the most important assets on the base. Hence, the Mission Dependency Index. Their MDI would probably be very high, somewhere in the mid to upper 90s. Most of all the work that they call in will be prioritized as a 3A, because if that mission stops, that impacts the entire base mission. So, but if you look at it and you say, okay, I have a storage facility, or I have just a storage area that houses, replacement parts, or, maybe just something that I access once in a great while. That, as far as for the Mission Dependency Index, will probably be very low, maybe somewhere in the low 20s. So most of all that will be prioritized as a 3C. So 3A through 3B through 3C, the very first delineating prioritization will be based on MDI, or Mission Dependency Index. So the higher MDIs, 90 and above, reside in 3A. From 89 down to 60 is 3B, and then 59 all the way down to 0 is a 3C, typically. Now, there's caveats to that as well. Just because it's a low MDI facility doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to be a 3C. It really depends on a derivative impact to the mission or some other things. So let's say, for instance, you have a RAC. That's a risk assessment code that's assessed by safety. So let's say, for instance, you have a stairwell in your dormitory, and there's an issue with your stairwell in your dormitory that creates a safety hazard. If you feel that that is something that should be elevated, then I urge you to contact your wing safety folks and have your wing safety folks come over and evaluate it and assign a risk assessment code. If they assign a risk assessment code of 1 to 3, that automatically elevates to priority 3A. A priority 3B would include a RAC, or risk assessment code, of 4 to 5, and priority 3C would be there's no risk assessment code. The same thing for what's called a fire safety deficiency code. If you think anything that impacts, fire, health, or anything like that, and it's not a safety issue, but still an issue to something for personnel life safety and health, then you can call your fire department and have them take a look. And they'll do an assessment. If they assess it and assign a FSD, or a fire safety deficiency, of 1 to 2, that automatically moves it up to a priority 3A. And then a fire safety deficiency of a 3 automatically leaves it at a priority 3C. Sometimes they can work internally and move that up to a 3B. So within the priority 3s, there's some, play or some workability in how your priority gets assigned and how it gets elevated. I will tell you that most of the time you're probably going to be right around a 3B, maybe 3A, depending on what it is. And that's really, you need to sit down with your folks at the installation and find out how the installation takes a look at that. And as you garner that relationship with your customer service folks, because after all, you're going to deal with them a lot, they too can help you out and try to see what they can do behind the scenes to help you with your priorities. Once the priorities all the way down to 3C have been exhausted, then we move down to priority 4A and 4B. All of our priorities are broken down into two different categories: sustainment and enhancement. So as far as for sustainment goes, that's basically just carrying on the mission and fixing stuff. So that takes us from 1 all the way down to 3C. Priority 4A and 4B are what we call enhancement. Those are it doesn't really contribute to the mission operations. It's a nice to have. It may be important, but not necessary. So a lot of the times what we get into is you walk around your facility and you look at your ceiling tiles. Some of your ceiling tiles may be dingy. One ceiling tile may be missing. They may be different colors or different shades or different styles. Well, it's still serving a purpose and it's still working. Do they all have to be the same color and not have a small stain on them? Well, as long as that stain doesn't include, mold or anything like that, which would elevate the priority to fix a life safety deficiency, it's a priority 4A. It's a nice to have. It's something that, isn't necessary, but may be important. So it's one of those kind of things that when all of the other higher priority work is done, then the priority 4A can get worked on. And then we go down to priority 4B, and that's really your nice to haves. Those are your air shows, reserve parking signs, that kind of stuff. And realistically, priority 4Bs don't happen that often, but we all know that, wing commander directs things, and, until we had the COVID-19, we were doing air shows and all this other stuff. So with that being said, if and when we ever go back to a, new normal, by the time they figure all that out, maybe we'll start doing all this stuff again, and it's at wing commander discretion. The reason why we added this as a priority 4B is because it has nothing to do with the mission. It's just one of those kind of things that's a nice to have. So if the wing commander directs it, what we want to be able to do from a CE perspective is say, okay, sir or ma'am, we understand you want us to do this work, but there's a whole lot of priority 3As, 3Bs, and 3Cs that aren't getting done at a cost of this. So with that being said, we wanted to be able to, package that information up and send it to all of our commanders, wing, group, and squadron commanders across the installation, so they understand and they follow along with the priorities and just let CE do their job. So I know that you will consider yourself to be an external person to CE because you're calling in stuff just like any other facility manager would, but I want you all to remember that you are CE by nature of your assignment, and you will be working against your own squadron if you try to manipulate the priorities. So practice networking, practice good, social norming and working with your customer service folks and establish that relationship. They can help you as much as they possibly can, but please don't try to manipulate the priorities, because that just causes extra work. And believe it or not, you got smart folks out at the base that are going to figure it out when you start manipulating the priorities, and that just ruins your relationship and makes it worse. So please follow the priorities the best you possibly can. So here's the workflow definition that I wanted to show you, and what I want to do is just walk you through how work gets called in and where you are going to be part of that process. So what I did is I just outlined the process here and showed you how work breaks down for CE, how things get done, and where you fit into the bigger picture. So if you see where the yellow circle is around those blocks, that's exactly where you're going to get involved in the process. So from the very beginning, if you see in the swim lane during the start, it says facility manager and or customer, and that's inputting the request. The request can be done via telephone call. That's for emergencies only, or if you have a different type of work support system other than NextGen or TRIRIGA. So if you're a base that operates under NextGen or TRIRIGA, the only time you can call customer service is in the event of an emergency. Anything else that's routine in nature, you will enter that, or when I say routine, I mean anything other than emergency, you will enter that into the system, because you will have a SAR, a system access request form. Just like you would to get email, you'll have a SAR form that requests access to TRIRIGA NextGen. And then you will be the person that inputs all of that information. So as it flows down through, the very first thing that's going to happen is the CE customer service folks are going to get that in the system. They'll get a notification that it was submitted, and they'll get that in the system, and they're going to validate that request. So they're going to cross that against internal information such as our real property database, AFI type stuff, and they're just going to make sure that it's a valid request and it makes sense. If it's not, they're going to kick that back to you, and you'll get a notice in your inbox that it's not valid or they rejected the request for some reason. That'll give you a chance to either modify that or do whatever you need to do to update that request. And then once they determine that, yes, it is valid, then they're going to classify the work as we talked about earlier. Is it construction? Is it repair? Is it maintenance? And then they're going to look at that and they're going to classify that accordingly. And then they're going to prioritize it based on everything you said. Now, I want to foot stomp this here based on what you said because you input the requirement initially. So what I want you to understand is under prioritized work, they're going to try to figure out whether it's a 3A, 3B, or 3C, and they're going to assign the appropriate shop. So this is what takes the longest and where stuff gets caught up in CE through processing. So I want you to put a different hat on right now, and I want you to imagine that you're the tool bag carrying craftsman that's coming out to your facility to fix an issue. Let's say, for instance, you input something and you said, toilet in-op in the men's room. To you, that sounded like it was enough. To that craftsman that walked out there, guess what? If I walk into a typical facility, there are several men's rooms in that facility, several toilets, several floors. So by the time they walk around and try to figure it out, they're spending several hours in the facility just trying to pinpoint, where the location actually is, unless they get lucky enough and find somebody that knows. And then when they finally get to that, now they have to figure out what's the definition of in-op. How does that work? Well, is it low flow? Is it clogged? Is it leaking? There's so many things that could be. So as you think about that, by the time they detail it, I got to be honest, if you're the craftsman, you're not going to spend a lot of time trying to figure it out. And if you look at it and everything looks normal to you, you're going to leave. So as the customer, you're left without your problem fixed. And from a craftsman's perspective, they've wasted several hours of the day. They could have been doing other work to respond. So when you input the work, this is just hopefully something that they will tell you when you get to your base, but this is something that will help you do your job better. So I will foot stomp this. Take the time to spell out the issue. Hey, I have a leaking toilet in the men's room. It's the first floor men's room. As you walk in there, it's the second toilet on the right, and the toilet is leaking. That tells the craftsman everything that they need to know, and they can easily respond quickly, efficiently, and get that problem taken care of. Now, another example is, ceiling leaking. Make sure that you know that if you have a ceiling leaking, that can be 3 different sources. That can indicate a roof leak, that can indicate an HVAC return line, or it could even indicate a plumbing line. So if there's access to the ceiling and it's under 10 foot, poke your head around in there with a flashlight and try to see what it might be. Because if they have to assign it to one shop, the shop goes out. If the shop doesn't share that and say, yeah, it's not ours, then the process starts over. And it could be an endless loop that gets very frustrating. So as far as for workflow, I just want you to understand that that's where a lot of stuff gets bottlenecked. And by you taking the time to input that correctly and provide as much information as you can will make that situation a lot better in flow. So as everything flows, we get to the next block. So the next block, you can see where it's circled, says notify facility manager. And there should be a yes/no block on there. Well, for you, 9 times out of 10 will be a notification because it will probably require access to the room. So this is where you'll get involved. Who's going to provide that access? Is it something where you have to be present? If it's a female airman and a male craftsman, do you have to have another female to coordinate that? Or can your bay orderly snag the keys and let the folks into there, or do you have to have the airman present to be in the room as well? So that's where you get involved. And then at the end of it, hopefully, because you're involved anyway, the next step is a moot point where it says work closeout. But under work closeout, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that you get a notification that says, hey, CE was over here at this room at this time, fix this issue. That should trigger you to either A, send one of your folks there, or for you to go up there and look and make sure that that issue was taken care of. If the issue was not taken care of, then you can submit back through the system and say, hey, hold on a second, this was not done, this still remains, and then the job or the work task stays open. If not, then you can give feedback and say, hey, great job, did a good job, responded good, took care of it, yep, it's closed. So I just wanted you to understand how workflow works behind the scenes so you get a better idea of what to expect going forward. So this is just another depiction of workflow. I'm not going to walk through it. It's the exact same way that it was before. I just wanted you to see that sometimes CE can self-generate their own work. So if, let's say, for instance, they're doing their maintenance that I talked about earlier, where they'll go out into the mechanical room or whatnot, they may find something that is a direct relation to something in the facility and they need direct access to a room or something like that to take care of it. It could be a policy upgrade or something along those lines. So from there, they'll notify you again and they'll tell you, hey, we self-identified this work. We know that we need to do it. We need access. They coordinate it and everything's taken care of. So I just wanted you to see this workflow, and this is how CE will self-generate work. So, that moves us on to project planning and execution. I'm going to skip over this very quickly because you probably won't be involved in this much at all. I just want you to understand that, let's say, for instance, you get to your base and they say, hey, there's a project on the books to get all this taken care of, which means other than calling in maintenance to make sure that that's moving along and it's still operational, waiting for the project to replace it, upgrade it, or do the major repair, CE's not going to do anything with it, and they're just going to keep coming back to you and tell you that there's a project on the books. So the way the project on the books works is it remains there until picked for funding and for fiscal year accomplishment. So a lot of number of factors behind the scenes. No need to cover all that. I just basically went through and showed you different methods of accomplishment. So let's say it's beyond the scope of our CE craftsman, and it's something where I talked about your nice to have or your construction. Wasn't there before, but I need it now. Let's say, for instance, you got a new airman dormitory leader. You're the new airman dormitory leader, and the only way to configure the office, especially now with COVID and 6 feet of separation for social distancing, is to reconfigure the office, but you have to move your entrance door. Well, you're moving it to another location. Wasn't there before, you want it there now, construction. Our craftsman may not do it, but we may elect to do that through a number of other options. It's still a small scale project, so we can still do that through what we call a Sabre contractor, a GSA contractor, a service contract, something else. It just basically says that CE has the responsibility to get the work done, but not necessarily do the work. And then the other methods of execution for what we call a capital project, those are your, probably $1 million, several $1 million projects. Like I have to, replace the HVAC for the entire dormitory, or I have to replace the roof, or I have to add a whole nother wing on or remodify it, whatever. Then that's all coupled through things that work up into a certain project list that could be any one of these that we have outlined below. And I just showed you the breakdown for how it would work for a dormitory. So like I said, you could get to a base and find out that you have projects on the books, only to find out that 3 or 4 years later, when you're done with your duty, the project still isn't done. And I just want you to understand because we have so many projects and so limited funding. Most bases are lucky to get 2 to 3 projects approved every year, and they start out with a list of a couple hundred. So constantly that list is changing and priorities change. So it could be a number of years. So just wanted you to understand how project planning and execution work behind the scenes. And then that kind of falls in line to dorm master planning. So what I want to do is I want to cover dorm master planning really quick, and then as soon as we're done with dorm master planning, I'll go ahead and I'll pause the lesson and give you all a 10-minute break, so that way you can kind of stretch your arms and rub your eyes a little bit, get up, use the restroom, and then come back to the lesson. So dorm master planning. The reason why dorm master planning exists is because of standardization at every Air Force base. So what happened was when Chief Cody was the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Chief Cody sat down with a panel of both senior representatives and junior airmen at the base level, and they determined, how do we construct the layout of a dorm to make it the best for our airmen and also easily manipulated and designed? So dorm master planning basically sets that dorm construction rate and the dorm construction projects by fiscal year at every installation, and it kind of builds a roadmap for planning and programming those investments, operations and maintenance and that kind of stuff. So it helps maintain that established occupancy and helps maintain that construction schedule across the Air Force by building the dorms all the same moving forward, and also manipulating current design at current design stages to make sure that stuff that was already approved for funding and already given funding, that the dorms are built based on the new concept and the dorm master plan, or the dorm of the future as they call it, versus constructing something that's an old World War II era or later facility that doesn't necessarily meet the needs 100%. So like I said, it just basically prioritizes the dormitory master plan across the Air Force for high-level funding approval and make sure that the airmen have what they need. So what that did is that created what we call the dorm of the future, and it basically looks at initiatives for time in the dormitories, how long should airmen live there, the impact on occupancy and unit integrity, room configuration for new and replacement construction, and design. And I just said a second ago for design stages. Design stages are broken down from initial, or 5%, then moves on to 35%, which is essentially the first layout, then 65%, which is minor tweaks needed, and then 95%, which is this is ready to rock. Only emergency situations where we missed it will include a change. But at the 35%, that's where you can really change everything and make everything happen. So anything that was at the 35% or below were changed to the new dorm standard, and everything over that, because it's more cost and more time in order to meet the building deadlines and everything, they said not to be changed. So, and that only maybe a handful of situations. So this is where you're used to seeing existing dorm configurations. And if you joined the Air Force when I did, I don't think you're in this class if you did, but I joined the Air Force in 1994, and I was living in the 2+2 standard as how it was right there, pre-1995. So it was 2 people, 1 room, all shared, one sink in the room, and then the other room next to you with the other 2 people. So 4 people shared a bathroom, and rooms were small and cramped, and you really had to get along with your roommate. And then they started changing the layout to the 1+1 standard, which many installations still have the 1+1 standard. And matter of fact, some of them might still have the 2+2, but still only 1 airman in the room versus 2. And then you can see how it morphed. And then it went to the D4A standard, and had everyone with their own room, their own bathroom, and then a private kitchen and all that. So throughout my career, I had seen this morph and change as I saw new dormitories being constructed. And what that did is it moved it to the new construction standard as approved by Chief Cody's panel in the dorm of the future. So you can see now how it has a layout. It has a bedroom that, in my opinion, will look like a typical hotel room. And then you have a small hall and a closet when you walk in. The only thing that it adds is a small kitchenette area, but the airmen still have their own private bathroom. So realistically, if you got, if you went to Homewood Suites or Candlewood Suites or something like that and it had a little kitchenette, you'd see something pretty close to this standard, if you will. So this is what the new and replacement construction standard is for the dorm of the future and how it includes everything. And you still will have, a centralized kitchen for those folks, that cook the big meals and all that kind of stuff, but there's only going to just be one. And then it changes the layout of probably what you're concerned with most as an airman dormitory leader, other than the rooms, is this is how the reception and how everything's going to be laid out for your offices and how everything will work for the flow going into the building. It adds back the mail, makes sure there's vending and has elevators and storage lockers, public restrooms, has your management office and a reception area leading right up to the stairwell into the airmen's rooms. So this is the new construction standard, and this is what's called the dorm of the future. And again, as a recap, this was all created to kind of keep an eye on the entire dormitory portfolio across the Air Force and maintain those construction standards and the pots of money for construction. So, okay, class, welcome back. Hope you had a good break, got a chance to get up and stretch a little bit, get yourself a drink of water, go use the restroom. I just wanted to take a quick second, though, as I was thinking about this. Mr. Callis did call me offline, and I just wanted to kind of give you an update. I talked about the dorm of the future and being under Chief Cody, and can't confirm or deny it, but I think that the whole thing was started under Chief Cody, but everything was approved under Chief Wright, and the whole initiative was run through Chief Wright and went forward. So I just wanted to let you know that that is kind of an update, and this is kind of what happened, though. Just so you know that the effort was all approved in 2018 under Chief Wright. So as we move on, we're going to go ahead and move on to facility management roles and responsibilities. And under the roles and responsibilities, what I wanted to caveat is you are going to be the main POC for all issues within your facility, but at the same time, what I'm talking about here isn't necessarily going to be you doing all of this yourself. I want you to consider when you get your lesson on, your Bay Orderly, that you utilize Bay Orderly to the fullest extent possible and manage those folks, within your purview. So what I want to talk about is just you being the main POC for all issues. So first of all, like I said, you're going to get that notification from CE that talks about, hey, I need access to this person's room to fix whatever anomaly was called in. So you are probably going to have to escort CE workers, or if you have it set up well through your Bay Orderly, you could have escorts through the Bay Orderly, or even institute where the airman is actually present in their room during all work. So the second portion of this is you will now be known as the Jack or Jill of all trades. And this is in lieu of the dorm maintenance teams that used to reside back in the day. So some of the things that I wanted to talk about was minor maintenance repairs. As we move on into this training session, I'm going to have a better list, and of course, no matter how many things that I put on the list or remove from the list, it will never be all-inclusive. I just want you to understand that. So you're going to be responsible for minor maintenance and repairs. So what I mean by that is that's the simple stuff that you really think about it in this perspective. If you own a home or you rent a home or lease a home or whatever, are you going to call out a craftsman to change a light bulb? Are you going to call out a craftsman and pay them to tighten up a loose doorknob or to replace a cover plate on your electrical switches or outlets? And the answer is going to be no, unless you make a whole lot more money than I do and you just want to waste it, you're going to want to go ahead and you're going to take care of those little things on your own. So, with that said, some of the things that we talked about are going to be replacing light bulbs. Now, the caveat is those light bulbs and everything will be under 10 feet. So we do that because it's safety related. Excuse me one second. I'm going to close my window so we don't get this background noise. And my apologies for that, class. Under the new social distancing, I'm teleworking from home, so I pick up a lot of noises while I'm sitting here in my office. So did that so it would cut down on background noise. So like I was saying, though, perfect caveat in the grass cutting. You may have all heard the lawnmower in the background. Some of that kind of stuff, it's within 50 feet. And when I talked earlier about meeting with your base contracting folks, meet with your base contracting folks to find out what the actual responsibility is of the contractor. Because depending on how the contract is written, they may take care of everything all the way up to the edge of the facility. But the way everything normally works is 25 to 50 feet from the facility will all be on the facility manager's responsibility. So you may find that you have push mowers and weed eaters and definitely shovels for snow removal if you're stationed in Minot like I was. You just kind of have to look into what the requirement is and what you'll do. And like I said, that doesn't mean you're going to be out there mowing the grass, shoveling. Work that into your Bay Orderly program, but definitely meet with your contracting folks and find out what the requirement is so you know exactly what you need to be responsible for. Other things such as broken or cracked outlet cover plates. If you're looking around the room, you can look and find some light switches, and you can see that it has that plastic cover with anywhere from 2 to 4 to 6 screws, depending on how many switches you have. If that gets a crack in it or breaks, it literally takes, just a few seconds or up to a few minutes, to replace that cover plate. To have a craftsman come out to take care of that is a significant waste in time while they could be responding to bigger issues. So that's why that little kind of stuff was added to the list. So, and the same thing with loose doorknobs. We're not asking you to be technical professionals and craftsmen. We're just asking you to give it the old college try. So, and then what we said here, by any approved and recognized U-Fix-It work. So, like I said, this list isn't all inclusive, but some of the stuff that you can think about that's simple in nature, we're going to ask you to give it a try. If for some reason it's beyond your technical ability and you tried and couldn't do it, then by all means make sure that you enter that work task into the system for the CE craftsman to come out and take care of. So moving on as well, we talked about custodial services. I cover this because we do have custodial services, and there are certain things that may or may not be taken care of by your Bay Orderly. Again, when I said sit down with your contracting squadron, what I also recommend is try to see if you can set an appointment and talk to your folks in service contracts. If you remember the layout for the CE organization that I showed you, the second slide under operations engineering, you'll see requirements and optimization, and then you'll see service contracts. They all work essentially right next to each other, and the service contracts folks keep track of custodial services and refuse collection and all that kind of stuff. So what you can find out is where their contract ends and your Bay Orderly program needs to begin. So I recommend you definitely sit down with those folks to find out exactly what the requirements are. And then when we talk about energy management, there's really no way to, promote the best energy management, because with the dormitory occupants, it's their room. They're going to do what they're going to do. But in some of your, common areas or in your offices or whatever, we just ask that you promote energy stewardship to the best of your ability. And that means maybe occupancy sensors for when you're not in the facility, or making sure that you're turning off the lights, or unplugging printers or copy machines or anything like that when you're not in the facility. And every dollar counts and every dollar makes sense, and maybe pass this along to your dormitory residents to ask them to promote energy stewardship. But that's about the extent of it. But then we get into security and key control. So when it comes down to security and key control, every airman is given a set of keys. Typically, I think one, maybe two keys when they go into their room. What I like to cover is how to replace those and fix the issue. And depending on the configuration of the dormitory, which is why I showed you how everything morphed over time, if you were like me and you came in pre-95 and it was the 2+2 standard, on the 2+2 standard, when one person lost their key and they had to rekey it, two people had to get a new key. And in some instances, four people had to get a new key. So that's the way we look at everything here as well. The process for replacing keys and rekeying, it could be as simple as doing a recore, but it could be as extensive as having to recore the outside door, the whole 9 yards. And I've seen it as cheap as $5, and I've seen it as expensive as $500. So however key control works, make sure that you get that briefing from your lock shop or through your civil engineer customer service folks who will train you on facility management, and make sure that your dormitory occupants 100% understand how important it is for them to monitor positive key control and positive key security, because essentially any lost key, that's reimbursable and they're going to have to pay for all of that work. And the same thing for specialized keys. When I talk specialized keys, I'm talking about like there's mechanical rooms that may be on the interior of the facility. There's communications rooms. So off the top of my head, most of those keys are called M1 or OM1 or OM2, 3s, and 4s, depending. And I think the COM key is like a 346 key or an M88, whatever. But they all have codes that are stamped on the back of that key. And the specialized keys just mean that's specialized access to that. So more than likely, as an airman dormitory leader, you will not have those specialized keys because you don't have a need to access those areas. However, depending on the layout of the dormitory, you very well may have those specialized keys. And just remember that when it comes to specialized keys and dorm room keys, you can't just take those down to Ace Hardware or whatever, because they won't duplicate those and can no longer duplicate those. So no duplication authorized is just, a caveat to let them know that they can't do that. Okay, so again, we talked a little bit about submitting work. So I just want to cover it again really quick, just so you know. And it all comes down to differing based on the maintenance database. If you're going to be assigned to Air Force Material Command, then AFMC literally has 3 different databases that they use depending on where you go. We have a contract entity at Arnold Air Force Base, we have a contract entity at Tinker Air Force Base, and the rest of everybody else is operating under, CE folks, but an all civilian workforce. So some of the other ones like Air Education Training Command are the same way, and some other commands as well. But when it comes down to that, I know for AFMC, we have 3 different databases, and some of the other folks have different databases as well. And you may possibly be assigned to a base that just hasn't received Next Gen or TRIREGA yet. So when that happens, you'll be submitting exactly how I talked about before and how the process flow breaks down. You'll have to fill out a system access request form. You'll get access to TRIREGA as a power user, and then you'll submit the work that way. If not, then they will teach you how to submit the work at the location that you're going to. But typically it's still, I don't want to say the old school way of doing things, but the prioritization scheme of doing things, which would mean just emailing, calling, and even submitting some paperwork in form of the Air Force Form 332, how we always used to do that. So I try to cover that to cover all of you of your possibilities. So, but make sure that when you do submit work, you submit the correct documentation. So if you're putting in the system that hey, I have a major safety issue with this airman's room or our stairwell or our common area or whatever, but the folks go through that and they review it. If they don't see anything with safety coordination that has a risk assessment code assigned to it, well, you really can't state that's a major safety issue because the safety folks didn't even deem it a safety issue. So we'll ask you to reconfigure that and just tell us what's wrong. I understand that, inflating things and talking to folks about, trying to appeal to their heartstrings, make stuff get done faster. But if you can figure out to do that, so can everybody else. So it just takes a lot longer to figure out what the crux of the issue is. So if you talk about safety or fire department or anything like that, make sure that you have the coordination from those entities. And then when you talk about comm coordination, there are certain things that CE will assist comm with and certain things that comm does on their own. So if you need a phone line or anything else, basically comm will make sure that CE has drilled the necessary holes and installed the right faceplates. But other than that, running the lines themselves, that's all comm that takes care of that. And they have a different system with Air Force Form 3215 that they do for all that kind of stuff. And I don't want to cloud the waters with what they do, but sometimes you will be told that that's a comm requirement and you'll have to get coordination from comm. And then any kind of additional requirements. If for some reason you have an air crew and you have a specific air crew dormitory and there's a specific AFI that talks about crew rest and access to the rooms during a crew rest period, I lived with that because I was an operations flight superintendent for a while and I dealt with that. And I know that it's specific AFI specific that you cannot enter or knock or disturb a crew member during crew rest to work on anything. So you have to specifically coordinate that work outside of the crew rest cycle. So if it's anything AFI specific, make sure that you include that so that way the person reviewing and the actual craftsman knows that. Because when you interrupt a crew rest cycle, that's just never, ever, ever a good thing because that could halt the mission. And then worker escort, entry, access, and follow-up. Just make sure you have everything in place and coordinate so that way the workers have someone to get them into where they need to be and can escort so that way they can work it. And then follow up to make sure that the work was actually done and then it was done to the satisfaction of closing out that work item. So, again, not going to cover this a third time. I think we've covered this all, but this is the layout that talks about how everything is submitted with the service request and how everything is worked. So I'm going to skip down where it says CE internal and prioritizing the request. Again, remember how we went through the CE priorities earlier, and then I showed you on the flow chart. I know the flow chart had a lot of steps to it, but if you can think of your daily activities and what you did in your job and putting that into a flow chart, some of those steps in the flow chart really might take seconds or minutes, and it doesn't take a whole long time. So while the folks are prioritizing that, they're looking at a lot of different things, but they have immediate access to those databases and those other things to look at prioritizing that request and verifying the scope and the work avenue classification and all that kind of stuff and the method of execution. So that's how CE will internally prioritize and follow the steps. But it seems like it might take a while, but it's actually very quick. So when we talk about facility management and required maintenance, this is a better list and a little bit better for you to understand some of the things that we look at. So what I will tell you is if you have a grass cutting contract and the grass cutting contract does go up to the next to the facility, what they won't do is they won't pay much attention to a lot of areas that are behind fences or around fences or a big industrial unit. So what we find a lot is we'll have 4 and 5 foot tall weeds and grass and debris that are all around the HVAC units. Grass that'll collect along the outside edges of the coils for HVAC units. And what does that do? That creates overheating. It makes the units work harder and it makes them break down quicker. So what we ask is we ask that you add that to your bay orderly schedule and have the folks look around that, remove the debris, pick up the trash, take care of the overgrown weeds and all that, because who wants to be stuck in, Edwards, California, where it's 140 degrees in the desert with no air conditioning? Nobody wants that. So this just helps maintain the unit, and it helps you as much as it helps CE. Other areas, all of your dormitories have washers and dryers. Now, depending on the contract for the washers and dryers, and again, I would talk to the folks in service contracts again and ask them about your washer dryer contract. Most of them now, rather than repairing on site, they just basically come and grab the old one and put a new one in its place, either brand new out of the box or a refurbished and already fixed one from the warehouse. So that way it's, quick in and out. But what they're going to ask you to do is they're going to ask you to constantly look at the lint traps in, under, beneath. As airmen, do their laundry, do whatever, they're going to drop debris and all that. Have your bay orderly folks pull those away from the wall, clean out behind there, and make sure that the actual lint traps and the lint hoses are actually free of debris, because that could potentially be a fire hazard. The fire department will tell you that as well. So, and hey, you never know. You could make a lot of money, because as people start dropping stuff in there, they never pull the washers and dryers out. So, I have 3 daughters, so I never have money. So if I pull out the washer and dryer, I might get, some beer money. So it'd be a good idea to clean that and take a look at it. So, and other things for HVAC vents for the cold air returns. This really should be your individual room occupants. They're going to have a vent in their room, and hey, I was a supervisor. I looked at dorms, and I understand that some people just moved in from their parents' basement and they don't understand what cleanliness is. But as you inspect the rooms and let the airmen know, show them the heating ducts and all the return vents, and make sure that they're just dusting those and cleaning those. And if there is a filter in their room and they have one of the older rooms, make sure they're replacing the filter. And oh, by the way, when they're configuring their room to the way that they want, make sure that just because something looks great on that wall, that they're not blocking up a cold air return vent or a register, because, first of all, that could impact the flow of air, that could impact the way the system works, and it could impact whether or not that system breaks down. So all the CE folks, the craftsmen, will do is just change it back to the way it was. So just make sure that they understand that as well. And in the instance that you do have keys to a mechanical or communication room, just remember that this is not a storage area. The folks need to have 100% access in there, so they're not going to be going in and removing all of your stuff that you stored in there because you didn't have anywhere else to store it. Make sure that the CE folks have ease of access, can get in and out, and also anything that's stored in there could become a hazard and could melt, start a fire, whatever. So, and then just kind of take a look at common areas. But again, as another foot stop, consider adding that to your bay orderly schedule. So some other things for required maintenance. Again, I'm not going to go down the whole list here, but this just adds on to some of the stuff we talked about. But your biggest and most advantageous point is to be talking to the folks in CE customer service as you submit work. Think to yourself, does it make sense for me to call this in? Does it make sense for me to put this in the system? Is this something I can handle myself quickly and easily? CE is going to be looking at that, and the service call folks are going to be looking at that, and they're going to basically potentially kick back some stuff and say, hey, have you tried to do this yourself? And if you look at bullet number 4, yes, it says fixing clogged toilets. Yes, using a plunger. If you have a clogged toilet, the first thing they're going to ask you is, did you try to plunge it? If the answer is no, then you're going to get that work kicked back to you, or when the craftsman shows up, they very well may hand the occupant a plunger and say, okay, I'm going to be here to supervise. This is how you use a plunger. In the future, if it's a simple clog that you could have plunged, plunge it and take care of it. Other than that, if it's something that you tried to take care of and somebody had a week's worth of dining hall food and there's just no way you can unclog that toilet and they have to snake it or whatever, you've done your job. You've tried to do what you could do by using a plunger, tried to have the occupant unclog that the best they can. Absolutely, the craftsman will come out and take care of that. But we just want you to understand that, something as simple as that, we don't want to waste the craftsman's time when they have such a huge backlog of work that they have to get done anyway. Then the rest of everything else is you're talking about placing and removing signage. As you have distinguished visitors and all that kind of stuff, if you don't have a stockpile of placards, what I recommend is you try to talk to your, it depends on what shop it is, but it's usually going to be your vertical shop. Vertical shop being your carpenters, and ask them if they can make you some signs so that way you can easily keep that in your storage area and then set it out for the wing commander, the wing command chief, or any DVs that are going to be showing up for the facility. So, and then again, you'll have whatever is outlined in the local facility manager handbook or that CE service call determines will be your responsibility. So what I recommend is, as soon as you get there, like I said before, get that facility manager training from the local area, and then keep a hand on your facility manager handbook. And it's not a bad idea to keep a hold of these slides as well, so that way you can keep that as a reference. I'm not saying carry it around with you on a daily basis because you get tired after a while, but in the electronic age, create yourself a file storage area, which I'm going to cover that more in depth in a minute. But that way you at least have some of the things that you know you're going to need to perform your duties and have reach back capability for. So some of the things that you're going to have to do as well is you're going to have to create some action plans, or you're going to be responsible for updating that. Now, for the most part, creation of the action plans is going to be on the superintendent or the housing manager, but actually utilizing the action plans will probably come down to your level. And what I talk about when I'm talking about that kind of stuff, I'm referring to FP Con changes. As the folks come and enter and exit into the dormitories, most of the time they'll just enter and exit, using their own key, going wherever. You may have to restrict access to a centralized point so you can check IDs, do whatever. You'll have to update the FPCon signage and let everybody know in the facility. You may have to stand door guards, whatever. That plays into your exercise scenarios, your active shooter, even natural disasters and everything. But dorm security, make sure you have that dorm security plan, any kind of fire safety plans, safety. When I talk about MSDSs, that's your material safety data sheets, and any kind of cleaning chemicals or specific chemicals or anything that you have that could potentially be hazardous. Make sure that you have that in a certain area where everybody can access it to read it, but also have your program for that. And they should talk you through all that when you go through your facility manager training at the local level. And then we get into the crux of records management. So I have AFMAN 37139. That was actually rescinded and replaced with 33363. So check that out when you get a chance. It just talks to you about the minimum things that you need to keep and how long you need to keep it on file. But as a general rule, I mean, most of the time now we have tons of access that we can have, records upon records upon records lasting forever. So even though it says 2 years or current year plus 2, that's 3 years, I would always keep things for a lot longer. I mean, I can reach back into some of my, databases and I can find stuff from 15 years ago. So it doesn't hurt to have that. And even if the person you're replacing didn't do that for you, you could potentially make the next person's job a whole heck of a lot easier if you set this up for them. And it makes your job easier too, because as you work in the job, you're going to learn more things. You're going to learn more tips of the trade and tools. So it's best to have that at your fingertips. So I've been mentioning AFIs and AFMANs and program action directives and all that. If you need a copy of all those, feel free to reach out to me at the end of this. At the end of the briefing, there should be a centralized repository I think Mr. Callis is going to create for questions. Feel free to reach out. Post me what you want. I have everything electronic and I can email it to you. But what I would recommend is keep a copy of your applicable guidance AFIs, AFPAMs, and AFMANs. And what I say by that is CE operates by a specific set of rules. And unless there's another AFI governing that they do something different, then CE is always going to operate by their own governing. And that means, response times, the whole 9 yards. So if you have an aircrew squadron, or if you have, other typical folks that live in the dormitories and they operate off of different AFIs, or hey, I have a person that I know has to be in this type of room at this spot because this is how they have to respond. Have a copy of that AFI so you know how to answer. Copy of your local handbook, a copy of AFI 32-1001 for sure, because that's the Air Force's guidance for facility management, housed in that AFI, and then anything else that would help you do your job. But definitely keep a copy of your key control log, because you need to know who has keys, the whole 9 yards, when they were issued, how many they were issued. Anytime anything updates, like someone loses their key and you have to pay, or they have to pay, you have to be able to answer those questions to the locksmith and to customer service, so they know exactly, how many keys to cut, who to give them to, and the status. So then you'll have inspection reports. Remember how I told you that you were going to have safety and potentially fire department looking at certain issues? Well, they also do quarterly and annual inspections. As they do those quarterly and annual inspections, they're going to find stuff. I really honestly think that they don't feel their job is fulfilled unless they find something that they can write up. No, I'm just kidding. They're a great bunch of folks. But, they're going to find some stuff on there that they're going to write up, and it's your responsibility to follow through. If it relates to a work task or something that needs to be fixed at that point in time, as soon as you call that in or enter that into the system and it becomes in the CE database, you have now fulfilled your role, and it transfers on to the craftsman and CE customer service to answer that question. So keep a copy of that inspection report and annotate when you called everything in and did everything. Previously mentioned action plans, I would keep those. Your dormitory occupancy rate and occupancy layout, I would definitely keep that on file. You probably will already have a program already that already says who's in what room or whatever, but a lot of the times, you could be out and about and your commander can ask you, hey, I've got this request for this person to move off base. What's the current occupancy rate, layout, whatever? And you can reference that information and, be able to give a good solid answer. Key phone numbers. When I talk about networking, you're going to start to get to know folks and know who can help you, who can help make things a little bit better for you. Keep a copy of that. I say AFCOLS, Air Force Common Output Levels of Service. Those were actually rescinded until recently, and now AFCOLS seem to be coming back amidst the COVID situation we're in. So if you keep a copy of the AFCOLS, you'll know how often and to what extent that folks are supposed to clean, sanitize, remove trash. And again, your contracting folks will help you with that because they'll be able to give you the details. And again, that's the copy of the appropriate service contracts, so you know how close to a facility, how the washer and dryer maintenance works, how cleaning works, where that kicks off, and then your bay orderly kicks in. So again, I say 2 years plus, 1 year, so it's 3 years total. So, but I'd say keep it as long as you possibly can. So realistically, we've covered a lot of information throughout this lesson. I tried to give you some good information, some pointers, where to start, how information flows behind the scenes in CE, the organization that you're now a part of, what you can do to make your job a lot easier, what you can do in the future to help out your replacement or help everything run smoothly, and a little bit of behind the scenes so you understand how the Air Force views the dormitory management plans and programs, and what you need to do as far as an assigned facility manager. So I know you can't ask questions now, but like I said, I think Mr. Callis is going to set up a centralized repository, but I'll make sure that everybody has my contact information. If you look up my last name, WARSITZ, on the global, I'm the only one that'll pop up. If you ever have any questions or concerns, feel free to shoot me your questions or concerns. I will caveat that if it becomes a policy type question and not just a simple answer, I will circle in whoever your MAJCOM representative is in your local leadership to make sure that they're aware. And I'm not giving you guidance and information that's counterintuitive to their way forward. But if it's just a quick and simple question and you're just like, hey, Chris, wondering about this situation, I will be more than happy to answer your questions and help you out. So I want to tell you to enjoy the rest of your day and wish you Godspeed.